Hello, my name is John Hebden and welcome to an interview that I did with Belfast-based singer-songwriter Brian Houston just before his UK tour in September 2023. Brian Houston is from East Belfast and has been making music since the early 1990s. Brian did a tour of various Yorkshire venues during late 2023 and I caught up with him on the phone just before he set off for England to find out the latest Houston news. And I began by quoting this from his website. If Wrong Sexsmith and Elvis had a baby, gave it to Bob Dylan to raise, but hired Van Morrison as a nanny, they'd call it Brian Houston. And that's a quote from the Drew Marshall Show. I asked Brian if this was a fair summary of his influences.
I get the Elvis, I get Bruce Springsteen, I get Bob Dylan, and I think the obvious ones are usually Bob Dylan and Van Morrison, partly because I use a harmonica and partly because I'm from Ireland, so I guess they're the obvious connections, you know.
But actually you are uniquely Brian Houston, aren't you? So we mustn't forget that.
Let's hope so.
Brian told me about growing up in Protestant Belfast and how his mother helped him to get to church rather than a place where he might have been recruited by the paramilitaries.
My next door neighbour who rescued my arm from a fire when I was a child was a terrorist called Michael Stone, very famous. So a lot of my friends and cousins did time for attempted murder or were involved in the loyalist side, but I didn't grow up like that. I think in some ways the church rescued me from that because we, instead of going at one end of my street, we had a school, primary school, and in the playground, the paramilitaries would teach you how to march, and that was the soft entry point to learning how to kill people, basically. And I asked my mom, could I go? And she tipped me around the ear and said, "Don't be daft," you know. And at the other end of the street was a church. And they would loan us guitars and teach us chords and lend us microphones and give us a room to practice in. And that was the alternative to learning how to kill people. So in many ways, the church saved my life, if you know what I mean. And in a winter's night, that was the welcome alternative, you know.
So you kind of picked the right end of the street.
Well, I guess, it wasn't easy for working class kids to go to a middle class church. To be honest, it would have been an awful lot easier to join the paramilitaries. But my mom just said no, and you don't mess with my mom.
Okay. God bless her.
No.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I asked Brian about how he put a live set together now, particularly given he had recently released albums of traditional Irish songs, Hank Williams songs, and Celtic worship songs.
Well, the three projects you've just listed, first of all, they're more kind of like, if you imagine I'm heading down the road of being a singer-songwriter, and every once in a while I took a little detour to see what that part of the road looked like. And so when we lived, my wife and I, we lived in the States for a while, and we became very aware of our Irishness when we were over there. There's something about living overseas, which makes you aware of who you are and who you're not. And so we were far more keen to listen to Irish influences and watch Irish movies and stuff whenever we were over there, or even movies just about Ireland, or even Scotland. It's just that homesick thing. And that's what kind of put in the idea for Songs of My Father and for the Celtic album, Anam Cara. That was like a journey into Irish music because I had never explored that genre before. And truthfully, the Hank album was done because I had a session booked and the guy let me down, and I just sat down with the microphone, printed out a couple of Hank lyrics and just started recording Hank songs, and it came out okay, so I released it. And so they were never meant to be, career defining. They're more just little, moments along the road. When it comes to a live gig, I'm inclined to focus mainly on my singer-songwriter stuff.
Oh, okay.
And I don't usually do Christian music unless I'm in a Christian context, like a church or something like that.
I told Brian that his choice of songs for his Songs of My Father album reminded me very much of the choice of material at an open mic that I regularly attended at a Catholic church hall in Leeds. He told me about putting a Brian Houston spin on songs of covers albums.
Well, it's the same as with Anam Cara and with the Hank record as well. I mean, And that's what I think is really interesting when people say you sound like this person or that person. When I've actually sung a Bob Dylan song, I don't sound at all like Bob Dylan, you know.
Yeah.
I think for any artist, you want to own whatever
Yeah.
you do, in the sense, not take it home and stroke it, but I mean, you want to put your identity on it, and you want to actually get inside the song and say it's as if I wrote this song. And there's great interpreters of songs like Elvis or Frank Sinatra, who, when you hear them sing a song, you know that's Frank, you know that's Elvis, and having that signature vocal helps that, but also their interpretation helps that. And that's kind of my compass when I'm doing covers or, you know, Irish trad music.
Yeah. Last year, Brian released an album of Celtic worship songs, which he called Anam Cara. Brian, tell me about this.
They're all original songs. Some of them, O Ro Shada Walya is one of the songs, which is an Irish traditional song, but I've just changed. Well, I've written new verses for it and changed some of the Irish lyrics to reflect what I'm trying to say. I kind of went on a journey in the Irish music with the songs from my Father album.
Right.
And then I pressed deeper into it. Like a few years ago, I got really heavily into 50s gospel, and then I got into hard gospel, and I made 3 records in a row that were all gospel records.
Right.
Because I was kind of just mining the kind of gospel theme, and it was the same with the Irish music. I kind of got into it on one record and then went deeper into it on the next record, and I listened a lot to Liam O'Mainley and different Irish musicians, and spent some time in Canada at a Celtic festival listening to Scottish music sung in Gaelic. So, and I felt a very strong emotional connection. So when it came to the Anam Cara record, as happened with the gospel record all those years ago, the songs just started coming to me, the melodies started coming to me, and I was already studying Irish language anyway, and so I was keen. I remember being in Canada and watching the native people worshipping, and what I expected to see was people stripped to the waist, oiled up, dancing around a big fire with drums, chanting their native melodies, and you know, shaking native rattles and playing native drums and stuff. What I encountered was pretty North American looking people in North American standard clothes, playing 50s style gospel, but singing in Cree language. And I felt so sad that the music that they celebrated God with was basically the music of the missionaries who reached them. And I remember chatting with God about it and saying, like, this is so sad that these people, their culture has been eradicated. And he said to me, well, what are you talking about? I mean, you're from Ireland and you've never celebrated your culture.
Ooh.
You're more influenced by American culture. I would love to hear your song. And so that's why I did it, because I literally felt like that was God impressing on me the need for Irish culture and Irish language to show up in songs of worship. And that's why I've used phrases like the warm shawl of your presence.
Ah, yes, that's nice.
And the peat fire of your throne room.
Yeah.
I've tried to use Irish references to kind of identify it as a record only Irish people could use and only our voice could celebrate. And part of that obviously is Irish language, and part of it is just the cultural references, you know.
Anam Cara included some Gaelic lyrics. I asked Brian how his Gaelic was coming along, and would he be able to order a meal in a restaurant in Gaelic?
No, I might be able to order a cup of tea. But in Ireland we say a couple of focal. In other words, it means I've got a couple of words. I mean, I can introduce myself in Irish. I can ask how you are in Irish.
Yeah.
I can introduce a song or something like that. And I have a few phrases, catchphrases that we use, which are funny in Ireland. There's one that goes, "This far gwelga na berla clishta," which means broken Irish is better than clever English, which we think is funny.
That's very good, yeah. Excellent.
You know? So, I was just more connected with my Irishness, and yet I was raised on the Protestant side of Belfast. I'm raised in an extremely loyalist community.
he has recently released another album of original singer-songwriter material. Brian told me about this.
Well, we put one out last year, it's eponymous, I think is the word they use. It's the first time I've ever just called an album Brian Houston, and we released it on vinyl, which is a first as well. So the idea behind that record was I'd got some new songs and some old songs, and since we were doing it on vinyl, I wanted to just try to represent my songs in a very stripped back, naked way, with very few frills around it. And so that's the concept of that album. That's why the cover's white and stuff like that. It's just like, here are the songs, stark. So that came out last year. And then obviously the 2 years during the lockdown, we didn't really do anything. I was busy writing songs, but we weren't releasing any music because there wasn't really any point, because we couldn't tour it or promote it or let anybody hear the songs. So, and then the first 8 months of this year, into 9 months now, I've basically been working on an entire singer-songwriter record, some of the tracks of which you've heard.
Yeah.
So this is an entirely 100% original album, of all brand new material that's never been released. So,
also on the White Album is a very beautiful song, Spanish, which Brian had just put up on YouTube when I spoke to him. Brian told me about the song.
I mean, the whole Native American connection is something that found me. I mean, I got an email from a Cree chief inviting me to come to his village. I flew over, we met, we drove 12 hours north, 500 miles to his village in northern Quebec. And along that way, he told me his life story, which involved this tragic tale of how Native children were removed from their families at gunpoint or force of starvation by the Canadian government. And I don't know about America, but I'm told it was the same. I only know from personal experience from talking to Cree Indians about their particular experience. And I was shocked to find out the last one of these schools closed in 1997. And so that was the first exposure I had to that. And I met a couple of people who had been abused physically, emotionally, sexually at these schools, and heard the whole story. And then a few months later, I was in Ontario, and a friend happened to live in a town that had a school there. And so we went down to look at the school, and I sat on the grounds there just by myself for about half an hour, and the whole song just kind of came to me there. And
wow.
A couple of days later, another Native person offered to record it. So the recording you have, it was recorded in Canada within a few days of the song being written. So it was literally hot off the presses. And the idea behind it was to just tell the story of how I encountered the residential schools and the parallels with what happened. I guess there's an emotional trigger for Irish people because of what happened in Ireland to do with our culture. And I guess that sort of triggered me in a way, and I wanted to highlight that issue, you know. But I'm told it's highly sensitive in Canada and very, you know, divides people a lot.
Brian had kindly sent me some recently completed tracks for his next album, and he told me about this project.
We're just finishing up. I'm actually in the studio today working on mastering that record, so just trying to sort out the final track running order and all that stuff. It's been 9 months of head down, backside up.
Okay. So it's not going to be finished by Saturday?
Not this week, no.
No, okay. Okay. So prior to the release of his next album, Brian is touring, including some September dates in Northern England. And I asked Brian if he was touring alone.
Yeah, just me and my wife travel together, and she handles the merchandise and I handle the music, and two of us get in our little car and drive around and do these gigs, you know.
Okay, it sounds like a lot of fun, and nice that you're concentrating on Yorkshire, God's own country as well. Yeah.
Yeah, well, when we lived in the States, and actually when we're going to Canada in October, what we're inclined to do is just we just get in a car together and we drive. When we lived there, we never really flew anywhere. I think in the 3 or 4 years we lived there, we flew twice to different places. The rest of the time we had a little Volkswagen Beetle and we just drove from town to town.
Yeah.
And we went to different sites along the way, and we're inclined to just try to enjoy the journey as much as the shows, you know.
And you've been listening to an interview with Belfast-based singer-songwriter Brian Houston from September 2023. And thanks very much to Brian and also to Alan Gibson for setting the interview up. And thank you to you for listening. My name is John Hebden and cheerio for now.